Good morning and welcome to Letter to Philippi Live, coming to you from Letter to Philippi, a new Messianic Jewish theological organization looking to lift Yeshua up by honoring Torah, respecting Jewish tradition, living within Jewish space and Jewish community of today, and seeking to make the Messiah known within a 21st century Messianic Judaism. So we'll be getting started today. Yesterday, if you were with us, you noticed that we had some technical difficulties. Actually, for some strange reason, my microphone was off, so I had a 31-minute talk with no audio, and I being the only one who heard it. So we'll actually be redoing our lesson from yesterday on the example of Timothy and Epaphroditus, and we will be looking at that today. We're having trouble with our Instagram getting started, so we will try that. We'll try that again. So welcome everyone. We'll be getting started soon. Again, there's some issue with our internet connection here, so we will get our stream going live. And so again, we are having trouble with our internet connection with Instagram. So we'll just get started, and if we get the Instagram stream going, we will work from there. So again, my name is Sean Emslie. This is Letter to Philippi Live, our daily teaching program looking at Paul's letter to the Philippians. And today we'll be looking at verses 19 through 30 of chapter 2, where Paul talks about the example of Timothy and Epaphroditus, two of his fellow co-workers, in making Messiah known. Okay, I guess we're not getting our Instagram today. So as we've seen through the Messianic hymn earlier in the chapter, that Paul set forward that Yeshua is the highest example of humility, and is the example that they should all follow. As Paul emulated Messiah, he called the people of Philippi to emulate him. And in so doing, he gives two examples here in Philippians chapter 2 as he ends this second chapter of his letter, speaking about two people that they're familiar with, Timothy and Epaphroditus, two of his fellow workers, two people that he worked with amongst the people of Philippi. Timothy, who actually came with him on his first journey to Philippi, when Paul first brought the message of Yeshua to the people of Philippi, and Epaphroditus, who was a member of the Philippian community, and they were familiar with him because he was a part of their community. So as I said, earlier in the chapter, we've seen the highest example of humility, which was Messiah Yeshua, and now for practical purposes, he's giving him examples of two flesh and blood people that they know that they could emulate as they emulate the Messiah. And reading here verses 19 through 22 on Timothy, the first example he gives them, Rav Shaul cites, the Apostle Paul says, "But I hope in the Lord Yeshua to send Timothy to you shortly, so that I too may be cheered by knowing how you are doing. I have no one who compares with him, who will care so sincerely for your welfare. People all put their own interests ahead of the Messiah Yeshua, But you know his character, that like a child with his father, he slaved me in advance of the good news. So in this first example, Paul puts forward Timothy, who was his fellow worker's co-worker, actually a person who participated in this letter, because he was concluded in the opening words of the letter that Paul and Timothy, slaves of Messiah Yeshua. So Timothy may have been the one that actually wrote down Paul's words that he gave to the people of Philippi here. So he's a close disciple of Rav Shul. And in writing here, he tells the people of Philippi that there's no one that he knows of that he can compare to who will care so sincerely for your welfare. He has such great esteem for Timothy as a worker for the Messiah that he says that Timothy is par excellence. Timothy is far above anyone else that could be of service to them. As Paul is in prison and unable to return to them physically, he was going to send Timothy as his representative and as his one to be his hands and feet working in the Philippian community. So Paul here is sharing that this man Timothy, which they already knew, he's affirming his place as one who will care tenderly for them because of his deep love for God, his deep connection to Messiah Yeshua. And next in verse 21, he says, people all put their own interests ahead of Messiah Yeshua. But you know his character, like a child with his father, he slaved me to advance the good news. So in here, speaking about Timothy, in contrast to many of those people in our world today, whose focus is on themselves, whose focus is on what would bring them joy, which would bring them happiness, which is focused on themselves. Paul says here, Timothy puts the interests of the Messiah ahead of everything. That the Messiah is the focus of everything in his life. That he puts the Messiah first, and they are to emulate that. That this is an example of someone who's truly, as we say, is in Messiah. That Paul keeps telling throughout his whole writings. That the goal of the life of a Talmudim Yeshua is to be more and more and more in Messiah. And Timothy here is showing that in his life, that he puts the Messiah first. His first priority is how he serves the Messiah. And out of that flows his serving others. But first and foremost, his focus is on serving the Messiah and putting the Messiah first in all that he does. And Paul continues saying, in showing this, he has slaved along with him. That Paul saw Timothy as a spiritual son. He was not the physical son of Paul, but because of their close work in ministry, their close work in making the Messiah known throughout the world, he had that deep connection and love for him as a son, and as a faithful son, as a loyal son, as a godly son. Timothy followed the example of Paul and put Messiah first and lived each day becoming more and more like the Messiah. And in so doing, he is put forward as an example to the Philippians of how they are to model their lives, to live their lives daily more and more and more in the Messiah. The Philippians already knew Timothy as a man of character, and Paul knew that they would be confident in his impending service on his behalf. He said the people of Philippi knew Timothy from his first time that Paul went to Philippi and when the message of Yeshua was first presented to the people of Philippi. So they knew him from that, and they knew the example of his character, especially being now confirmed by Paul as being par excellence of a Talmudim of Yeshua. And as we said, Timothy functioned as Paul's son in his ministry work, that there was such a deep connection between these two men. That Paul is the older apostle, and Timothy, the younger apostle, the younger disciple, modeled the Messiah as Paul modeled him, to the point that he lived his life out as a son, as a faithful son to his father. That we know that the biological father of Timothy was a Greek. His mother was Jewish. And we can see that there was not much contact, at least in the scriptural accounts, between his earthly father and Timothy in his growing, especially the fact that his father did not allow him to be circumcised. And Paul later in his life, before the mission to Philippi, had Timothy circumcised. So he was not circumcised as a child. So his father was not involved in his early life, as we can see that. But Paul here, in essence, adopts this young man to be his spiritual son, his spiritual co-worker, someone who, like a faithful son, was willing to live out the example of his father, Paul, and to serve with him, and to be now going to Philippi as an extension of the work of Paul. In verse 23 and 24, we conclude Paul speaking about Timothy, where he says, "So I hope to send him just as soon as I see how things will go with me. And I'm confident in the Lord that before long I myself will come to you." So Paul knew that his time was coming near to the end of his life, that he was going to soon face that final appearance before Nero, that final time where his execution was set. So he wanted to send Timothy here, who was with him with the writing of the letter, to be his representative, to be his connection to the people of Philippi. And he himself hoped that he might actually be able to come physically to Philippi, of which we know that he was not able to, and was eventually executed by the Roman emperor under Nero. But Paul knew that the people of Philippi could use some more connection from him. So he did have Timothy, who was able to send to them, to be his hands and feet and his representative, is basically his spiritual son, to be his representative for the Philippians. And as he said, he had hoped that he wouldn't be able to himself go to Philippi, but we know that he was unable to, and later would meet his death in Rome. But he was still hoping that there was a possibility that he would have the opportunity to travel before having to return to face the final judgment. In these verses, Paul expresses hope to send Timothy to be with them, to be with the Philippians. And Paul even expresses hope to be released from his imprisonment, to make one final trip to Philippi, to see them. But as I said, he was unable to go back to Philippi. So these are basically his final words to the people of Philippi in this letter, this community that he loved so much, and they loved him so much. So this is our first example that Paul sets forward to people that they are familiar with, Timothy. Next, he comes to Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus, as I said, was a member of the Philippian Messianic community. He was sent from Philippi to Paul in Rome to bring him gifts from the community and to be there as a person serving him and helping him in his condition. As I said, in the Roman prisons of that day, you're basically just thrown into a cell. And if you were to have food or water or medical care, that had to be provided by others outside. Basically you were on your own in the prisons in Rome. and the basics of life had to be provided by others. So the people of Philippi sent Epaphroditus to Paul in Rome to bring him supplies, bring him food, bring him medical supplies, and also for Epaphroditus to be a companion to him and to be with him in this time of separation in prison. On Epaphroditus, we read in verses 25 to 30 of chapter 2. Also, I consider necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, fellow worker and fellow soldier, the emissary whom you sent to take care of my needs. Since he has been longing for you all and has been distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill, close to death, but God has mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me. Otherwise, I would have had sorrow piled on sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that you may rejoice when you see him again, and I, for my part, may be less sad. So give him a joyful welcome in the Lord. Honor such people, for he risked his life and nearly died working for the Messiah, in order to give me the help you were not in a position to give. The Philippians had sent Epaphroditus, a member of the Messianic community in Philippi, to serve Paul in his Roman imprisonment. We do not know why Paul sent Epaphroditus back to Philippi specifically, though there's been understanding that he was sent back to Philippi to bring this letter. That one of the reasons that he was sent back to Philippi after being there and actually coming to the point of being near death, that he was so committed to the work of Paul, so committed to the work of Messiah, that he was to the point of death. As I said, it's more than likely, given the conditions of the prisons in Rome, that he may have picked up some kind of disease that was prevalent of that day in the prisons. So he was willing to give his life to serve the Apostle Paul as the emissary of the people of Philippi. So one of the things is that so Paul here is commending him for being willing to give his life for the Messiah, for his willingness to give all that he had, to be willing to even give his life for the work of the Messiah. And he commends him here, speaking of him, as speaking of this man Epaphroditus, that is, as his brother, his fellow worker, fellow soldier, and the emissary from them that he came to them. But he calls this man Epaphroditus his brother, fellow worker, and fellow soldier. He commends him for his faithfulness to the Messiah, for his faithfulness to the work of the Messiah, and his faithfulness to the people of Philippi. So he's holding this man out as another example of Messiah-like humility, Messiah-like self-sacrifice. And his Messiah-like self-sacrifice almost cost him his life, because it said that he was near death. But he was willing to lay his life down for the work of the Messiah. So Paul commends him for that and sends him back to them, the people of Philippi. As I said, one reason being he was returned to Philippi was to deliver this letter, that there's understanding that this letter, basically Paul's final words, the people of Philippi, were delivered to them by Epaphroditus, who had been with Paul in prison in Rome, and now returns to give these final words of instruction, these final words of his deep love for this community. And also, being that they had heard in Philippi of Epaphroditus' illness and his being near death, Paul sends him back now cured, now back to health, back to being out of this sickness that led to death, in wholeness, back to them, to encourage them, and for them to see him back whole, back in good health, to encourage the Philippian community of God's healing power, that this man, though he was near death, by God's powerful hand, he was raised to new life, raised to wholeness, raised to being healed and able to continue to serve the work of the Messiah. So in this, Paul sends this man that he commends as his brother, his fellow worker, and fellow soldier, one who was side by side with him in the work of the Messiah. He returns this man, commending him for his faithfulness to God, his willingness to live out the Messiah-like humility, the Messiah-like self-sacrifice. As I said, him also coming to the point of death in this time to serve Paul. He sends this man back to them, a member of their own community, and say, model this man. This man is modeling the Messiah. This man is an example of the Messiah. This man is a co-worker with me in the Messiah. And you and the people of Philippi should be co-workers for the Messiah, like Epaphroditus. And he commends them to accept him back into their community as an example to them of Messiah-like life. In speaking about Epaphroditus, Robert Lightner, a biblical scholar, expanded on Paul's feelings about Epaphroditus when he wrote, Paul wanted to be doubly sure the believers knew, those in Philippi, how highly he thought of Epaphroditus. He called him my brother, my fellow worker, and my fellow soldier and messenger. He shared Paul's spiritual life, labors, and dangers. He willingly took the role of a servant to assist Paul. This man, whose name means charming, served the Lord while he served others. So Lightner here is expanding on this concept of what Paul was commending the people of Philippi to understand that this man was his brother, his fellow worker, fellow soldier, and messenger, and a true example of Messiah-like living. That this man that they know, man, this is part of their local Messianic community, Messianic fellowship, is an example of the Messiah that they are to take into their own lives and to understand that they were to commend themselves to be like Epaphroditus, who was like the Messiah and a co-worker, and for them to be continuing co-workers with Paul, even though his earthly life was coming to an end, that they were to continue to work for the Messiah and to continue to be co-workers in the work of the Messiah. As we said, that while he was in Rome, he was sick to the point of death, but miraculously he was raised to new life and able to continue the work of Paul amongst the Philippians as his hands and feet, as his representative, and as a model to them. So we see in these two men that Paul set forward as two examples of Messiah-like living, the people who modeled the humility and self-sacrifice of the Messiah. Timothy, who was a part of the first people, along with Paul, to bring the good news of the Messiah to the Philippians. A man of character, a man who put the Messiah first in everything, as an example to the Philippians to put Messiah first in all of their lives. And we have Epaphroditus, a member of the Messianic community in Philippi, one of the members of their community that Paul called a fellow worker and a fellow soldier. And as Epaphroditus was a fellow worker, fellow soldier for the Messiah with Paul, he commends the Philippians to follow his example and to be fellow workers, fellow soldiers in the work for the Messiah. So these two men are set forward as examples. As we saw earlier, the highest example being Messiah Yeshua, of following the plan of God, following the path of humility, following the path of self-sacrifice. And now Paul commends two people, flesh and blood people, familiar to the Philippians, for them to model in their lives. Though we may not be able to meet the high example of Messiah Yeshua, which we would not be able to do in this life, but he does set forward people who are in this life modeling the Messiah to the highest extent, and calls the people of Philippi, and us as by example, to follow their example and to become totally walking in the way of the Messiah, living lives of humility, lives of self-sacrifice, and lives working to be fellow workers to make the Messiah known in our world, and to be a light in a dark world. So this concludes chapter 2 of the letter to Philippi, and we'll get started on chapter 3 next week, as we will be looking at Paul. Will be confronting false teachers that would be a threat to the Philippian community. As I said, this is Paul's final words to the people of Philippi, which he loves so much. In chapter 3, he gives them words to warn them against false teachers that could be coming to the people of Philippi. We bringing them incorrect understandings of their new life in the Messiah. And Paul wants to make sure they understand that there is a correct path following the Messiah. There's an incorrect path, and they need to stay on though there are many incorrect paths, there is one correct path. And he calls them to understand that and understand their life as, for the people of Philippi, as to understand their new life in the Messiah, to understand that they were to follow the path of the scriptures, follow the example of Paul, and to follow Messiah in the right way, and understanding that Yeshua is all in all, and Yeshua is the knowledge of Yeshua, the atonement wrought by Yeshua, the new life that we have both now and forevermore, is far greater than anything in life. And Paul wants to make sure the Philippians know that they need to stay on the path of following the Messiah, following him purely, following him as they are to go, and to follow him as their Lord and Master and King. And as I said, to be lights in a dark world as they become more and more in Messiah. So that concludes our time today. Thank you for watching. And we'll have to, now that we get the one streaming working, we have trouble with another. So we'll have to get that working with the Instagram on Monday. We'll have that up and running too. And for those who watch on Instagram, we will be posting the video to Instagram Live later today. All right. Thank you for watching, and have a good weekend. For those who are yet to enter Shabbat, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. For our friends and family in Israel, they are already into Shabbat, so they are already there. So I guess I can say Shabbat Shalom, even though they may not be watching. But for those who are in the States, have a good Shabbos, and we will see you on Monday as we look at Philippians chapter 3 and Paul confronting false teaching that was entering into the Philippian community, and it could be a threat to the pure faith of the people of Philippi. So thank you, everyone. This is Letter to Philippi Live, an initiative of lettertophilippi.org, a new Messianic Jewish theological and teaching organization. You can find out more about Letter to Philippi at our website, lettertophilippi.org. There you can watch previous class videos. You can purchase my Messianic commentary on Philippians, which this class is based on. You can leave a prayer request. We want to be praying for you, and I'll be praying for all the requests to come in. You can make a much needed financial contribution to this work, and we have opportunities for both one-time and continuing gifts. This work continues based on your financial giving, your investing in the work of making Messiah known through the work at Letter to Philippi. And we also have other information about our organizations on the website. Just go to lettertophilippi.org, and we will see you on Monday. So, as I said, early Shabbat Shalom to those in the States and those who have yet to enter the Shabbat, and see you on Monday. Shabbat Shalom.